"Turn that music down or I'm calling the police." The shout cut through the summer air like a warning shot. On a quiet street in Willow Creek, the sound of laughter and soft jazz from a backyard wedding froze mid-beat. A white woman in a floral robe stood at her fence, phone in hand, eyes narrowed like she'd caught a crime in progress. Across the yard, the groom, a tall black man in a crisp tan suit, lowered his glass, his jaw tightening just slightly. He didn't yell back. He just watched her, like he'd seen this scene before. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe love deserves peace, dignity, and respect, hit like and subscribe. These stories matter because silence has never changed anything. Now, back to James Carter. The party hadn't even reached the vows yet when the police lights flickered at the end of the cul-de-sac. Red and blue washed over the hydrangeas and string lights that James and his fiancée Alana had hung themselves the night before. Guests turned. Phones rose. Somewhere, a child started crying. James put his hand gently on Alana's shoulder, steady, calm, protective. "It's fine," he whispered, though his eyes said the opposite. The white neighbor, Mrs. Lacey Dorn, crossed her yard like she was marching into battle. "I told you this is a residential area," she barked. "You people think you can do whatever you want." The last two words hit like gravel. Alana flinched. James didn't move. He'd been called worse. The officers hesitated by the gate, confused, sensing the eyes of every camera in the crowd. "Ma'am," one said carefully, "we received a noise complaint." Mrs. Dorn folded her arms like a judge. "You should check their permit if they even have one." James took a breath, stepped forward, and said evenly, "We do, and this is our home." His tone was level, but there was iron underneath it. He wasn't defending a party. He was defending belonging. The neighbor sneered. "Your home? Don't make me laugh. Houses here don't come cheap," a few guests murmured. Someone whispered, "Did she just say that?" Alana's maid of honor, a Latina woman named Rosa, stepped closer, voice trembling but clear. "Ma'am, this is a wedding, not a nightclub." "Mrs." Dorn smirked. "And who invited you, sweetheart?" The word sweetheart wasn't sweet. It was a slap dressed in sugar. James raised a hand, stopping Rosa before she said more. His silence wasn't weakness, it was control. But inside, his pulse beat like drums from another battlefield. Because 10 years ago, he'd been on one, a real one. And the woman calling him trouble today had no idea that the man she'd just tried to humiliate had once saved 6 soldiers under fire. The officer shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, we'll just check your permit and be on our way." James nodded, calm but unblinking. "Do that. It's in the folder by the door next to my bronze star." A hush rippled through the yard. Mrs. Dorn blinked, her expression faltering for the first time. But James didn't smile. He wasn't done yet. The police officer took the folder from the porch table and flipped through the documents, his flashlight cutting across embossed seals and signatures. "Everything checks out, sir," he said quietly. But the neighbor, Mrs. Dorn, was not finished. "Of course it does," she snapped, "because you people always find a way to make things look official." The murmurs from the wedding guests thickened the air. One of the bridesmaids whispered under her breath, "Did she really just say that?" The second officer shifted, clearly uncomfortable. "Ma'am," he began, "we are not here for that." "You should be," she fired back. "This neighborhood has rules. I have lived here for 20 years and I have never seen anything like this. Loud music, strange cars, people who do not even live here taking up parking space." James Carter stood perfectly still. He had been still like this before in a desert halfway across the world, under fire, when stillness meant survival. But tonight, the battlefield was his own backyard. Alana reached for his hand. "Baby," she said softly. "Let it go. She will not listen." He looked at her, and his voice came out measured, steady, and heartbreakingly calm. "If I let it go tonight, she will think she was right." Mrs. Dorn smirked. "About what? That this is not your kind of place?" The crowd reacted audibly now. Rosa, the maid of honor, stepped forward again, her voice stronger. "You have said enough, lady. Go home." Mrs. Dorn raised her phone like a weapon, already filming. "Oh, I am not going anywhere. People need to see how aggressive you all are." The irony hung in the air. James turned slightly toward the officers. "Am I being accused of something?" The younger officer shook his head. "No, sir, you are fine. We are just responding to the call." The older one added, "We will file it as resolved." But the damage was already done. The joy that had filled the yard minutes ago was replaced by the heavy silence of humiliation. James's best friend Marcus walked up, his voice low but firm. "Man, you do not have to prove anything to her." James gave a small, tight smile. "I know, but I do have to prove something to everyone watching." He stepped closer to the fence, his shadow stretching under the floodlight. "Mrs. Dorn," he said, "you called the police to stop a wedding. My wedding. On Veterans Day weekend." She blinked, thrown off. What does that have to do with?" "It means," he continued, "that the man you called the cops on spent 15 years defending this country, including your right to call them. I came home with scars you cannot see, and a medal I never asked for. And tonight, I just wanted to dance with my wife." For a moment, the only sound was the wind rustling the white tent fabric. Then someone began clapping. One guest, then another. The officers stood still, unsure whether to intervene or salute. Mrs. Dorn's face flushed a deep, guilty red. She turned off her phone slowly, realizing she had become the villain in her own recording. James did not smile, but his voice softened. "We will lower the music in 15 minutes. Not because you told us to, but because we planned to." He walked back to Alana, who was wiping quiet tears from her eyes. The officers nodded, embarrassed. "Congratulations, sir," the younger one said. "And thank you for your service." James just nodded once. "Make sure you remember that next time you get a call like this." The police car rolled away, leaving behind the echo of sirens and the weight of truth. Inside the house, the music resumed softly jazz again, but slower, fuller. People began to breathe again. Mrs. Dorn stood at her fence for a long time, the porch light flickering above her. In her reflection on the phone screen, she did not see a protector of peace. She saw a woman who had mistaken color for danger and respect for privilege. And for the first time that night, she looked ashamed. The wedding continued, but the lightness that once danced through the backyard had changed. Guests smiled more carefully, laughter edged with a kind of collective awareness. Alana tried to pull the evening back into joy, cueing the band to play the song they had planned for their first dance. James took her hand, and as the music swelled, something inside him softened. Yet even as he held her close, his mind replayed the look on Mrs. Dorn's face, the kind of look he had seen too many times before, disbelief that he could live where she lived, love how he loved, exist as he was. He had seen that same disbelief behind desks, in offices, even in airports when he traveled in uniform, but this time it had followed him home. Rosa leaned toward Alana and whispered, "Do not let her ruin this night." Alana smiled faintly. She cannot ruin what she did not build. Across the fence, Mrs. Dorn stood in her yard pretending to tidy a flower bed, her shame wrestling with her pride. She kept her phone in her pocket, screen black but heavy. A few neighbors had started texting her already. Word had spread fast. One message read, "Did you really call the cops on a veteran's wedding?" She had no reply. Inside the yard, the guests gathered near the dance floor as Marcus clinked his glass. "If I can have your attention," he said, his tone warm but resolute. "Before we continue this celebration, I just want to say something. What we saw tonight should not have happened. Not here, not to him." The crowd quieted. James tried to wave him off, but Marcus shook his head. James is the kind of man who serves quietly, who never tells you about the things he has done for this country. But tonight, he reminded us what real strength looks like. Not the kind you earn from medals, but the kind that refuses to hate back. There was applause, slow, deliberate, rising into something bigger than clapping. It was collective respect. Alana wiped another tear, smiling this time. James nodded toward Marcus, mouthing, "Thank you." For a moment, it felt like peace had returned. But then, from the other side of the fence, the sound of a car door slammed. Mrs. Dorn's husband, Harold, had come home. A tall man in a collared shirt, silver hair, stiff posture. "Lacey, what did you do?" he asked, voice low but sharp. "The whole street is talking." She whispered something, but the guests could hear the tone defensive, panicked. "They were loud, Harold. I was just protecting the neighborhood." He shook his head slowly. "By calling the cops on a man who has 3 medals of valor, you did not protect anyone. You embarrassed us." Silence stretched across both yards. James turned to look, not with anger, but with the same composure he had held all night. Harold raised his voice just enough. "Mr. Carter, sir, I am sorry for my wife's behavior. It was wrong. It was ignorant." James met his eyes and said simply, "Apology accepted, but make sure the lesson sticks." Harold nodded. the weight of the words landing hard. The band shifted into another song, and the mood began to mend itself again, thread by thread. The children started dancing. The guests loosened. The night found its rhythm once more. From the corner of the yard, Rosa whispered to a nearby guest, "You know, it is always the quiet ones who hold the most power." The guest nodded, watching James smile for the first time that night. And somewhere in the distance, the faint hum of crickets filled the silence that Prejudice had tried to own but failed to keep. The next morning, the sunlight broke through thin clouds over Willow Creek, washing the neighborhood in a quiet calm that felt too deliberate, like the air itself was trying to reset after what had happened the night before. James Carter stood on his porch in a gray t-shirt and jeans, coffee steaming in his hand, watching the street as sprinklers ticked across manicured lawns. A few houses down, curtains shifted as neighbors peeked through windows, unsure whether to wave or hide. The wedding tent was half taken down. Flower petals still littered the grass. The scent of barbecue and champagne lingered faintly, the ghost of celebration. Alana came out behind him, barefoot, hair loose, carrying her mug. "You did not sleep, did you?" she asked softly. He smiled faintly. "Not much." "You keep replaying it?" "Every word," he said. "And every silence, too." She sighed, leaning against the doorframe. "She will not forget it either." "Good," he replied, not coldly, just factual. "Some lessons need to hurt to stick." Across the street, a black sedan slowed, then parked in front of the Dorn house. Harold stepped out first, straight-backed as always, followed by Lacey, her face pale and drawn. They hesitated before walking up the Carter driveway. Alana tensed. "Do you want me to?" "No," James said gently. "We will handle this." Harold stopped near the steps. "Morning," he said. James nodded, calm. "Morning," Lacey's voice trembled. "Mr. Carter, Mrs. Carter, I came to apologize. I was wrong. I reacted out of fear, not fact. I thought I was protecting my community. But really, I was protecting my comfort." James said nothing for a long moment, just studied her face, her shaking hands, the quiet tremor of guilt that seemed real. "Fear does not give you permission to humiliate people," he said finally. "You called the police on love because it did not look like yours." Lacey's eyes filled with tears. "I know. I deserve whatever you think of me." Alana spoke softly but firmly. "We do not want revenge. We just want peace." Harold exhaled slowly, relief and shame tangled in his breath. "We have invited a few neighbors over this evening," he said. "To talk, to clear the air. I think people need to hear from you, Mr. Carter, about what you have seen, what it feels like." James hesitated. He did not want to be a spokesman for pain, but he also knew silence was how patterns survived. He nodded once. "I will be there." That night, the Dorans' backyard, once the scene of gossip, became a circle of folding chairs and hesitant faces. Coffee brewed, cookies sat untouched, and the hum of cicadas filled the gaps between words. James spoke plainly, not with anger but with experience. "Every time someone assumes I do not belong somewhere, it chips away at something bigger than pride. It chips at the idea of home. And for Black families, home has always been the one thing we have had to keep proving we deserve." The group listened, quiet, reflective. Even Lacey kept her head bowed, tears glinting in the porch light. Alana added softly, "We did not move here to make a statement. We moved here because we believed we would be treated like anyone else." A young couple near the fence nodded. The woman whispered, "You should not have to explain that." Harold cleared his throat. "This neighborhood prides itself on safety, but maybe what we have been protecting is our own bias." James looked at him, then at the rest. "Safety is not about who you keep out," he said. "It is about how you treat the people already in." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, slowly, people began to nod. Somewhere deep in the neighborhood, a porch light flicked on. And for the first time since the wedding, Willow Creek felt awake. The next few days in Willow Creek felt strangely calm, almost too quiet, like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. The gossip that had once lived behind closed curtains had started to shift into real conversations on front lawns and in driveways. James Carter noticed it on his morning runs. People who used to look away now nodded. A few even waved. But he also noticed the others, the ones who still crossed the street a little too quickly, pretending not to see him. Change, he knew, never came all at once. That evening, James sat in his home office, surrounded by framed photographs from his years in service. His platoon in Afghanistan, the rescue mission that earned him the Bronze Star, The folded flag he kept from his fallen friend, Lieutenant Harris. The same friend who used to say, "One day, we'll come home to a country that loves us back." James stared at that photo for a long moment, hearing the echo of those words. Alana appeared at the door. "They are asking you to speak at the city council meeting next week," she said. Harold called. He said it is about bias training for emergency calls. James leaned back in his chair. "So they want a soundbite from the guy who did not lose his temper?" "No," she said, stepping closer. "They want someone who makes them listen." He looked down, thoughtful. "That is the problem, Alana. People do not listen until they get caught." She sat on the edge of the desk, her hand brushing his shoulder. "Then let them get caught. Let them hear it from someone who lived it." Later that week, the council chamber was packed. Reporters sat near the back, and a few of James's wedding guests filled the front rows. Even the Dorans came, seated quietly in the corner, their faces drawn with humility. The mayor introduced James formally, listing his years of service and commendations, but when James stepped up to the microphone, he waved it off. "I appreciate the kind words," he said, "but I am not here as a veteran. I am here as a man who had to call calm the night his joy was mistaken for a threat." The room fell still. "I do not want another black man, woman, or child to have to justify a celebration in their own home. We talk about community safety, but who gets to feel safe? When a neighbor's first instinct is fear, and a police officer's first question is suspicion, the system is already broken." Murmurs spread through the room. Heads nodded. Others looked away, uncomfortable. "I do not hate my neighbor," James continued, "but I will not excuse what she did. Because when we excuse it, we invite it to happen again." He paused, the silence heavy but attentive. "You can teach policies, you can write laws, but you cannot fix what you refuse to face. And it starts right here, with accountability, not comfort." When he stepped down, the applause was slow, hesitant at first, then steady, sincere. Reporters leaned forward, cameras clicked. Alana met him at the aisle, squeezing his hand. "You were perfect," she whispered. "I was honest," he said quietly. "There is a difference." That night, as they drove home, the glow of streetlights stretched across the windshield like fading stars. In the rearview mirror, James caught a glimpse of the American flag hanging from his porch, the same one he had carried through war zones and homecomings. For the first time in years, it did not feel like a symbol of what he had fought for. It felt like a promise he was still keeping. In the days that followed the city council meeting, James Carter's phone would not stop ringing. Local news stations requested interviews, universities asked him to speak, even veterans organizations reached out, calling him a symbol of dignity under pressure. But James did not care for the spotlight. He kept saying the same thing to anyone who called, "I am not the story. The problem is, still, stories have a way of finding those who live them honestly." One morning, as James walked his dog through Willow Creek, a delivery truck slowed beside him. The driver, a young white man in his 20s, leaned out the window. "Hey, Mr. Carter," he said. "Saw you on TV last night. That was powerful, sir. My dad's a cop. He said you made him think." James nodded slightly, a polite smile. "That is all I wanted," he said. The man drove away, and for the first time in weeks, James felt a small measure of hope. But peace in Willow Creek did not come without tension. A letter arrived at his mailbox 2 days later, no return address, only his name typed in bold letters. Inside, a single line read, "Stay in your lane." Alana found it before he did. "Do not tell me this is happening again," she said, her voice breaking with frustration. James folded the note calmly and set it on the counter. "Let them write," he said. "I have faced worse threats than paper." "You should tell the police," she insisted. He shook his head. "They cannot protect me from cowardice." That night, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, a knock sounded at the door. It was Harold Dorn, his expression weary but resolute. "I heard about the letter," he said quietly. "Lacey and I wanted to check in." Alana hesitated but let him in. Harold looked around the house, the same one his wife had once doubted they owned. "This place suits you," he said. "It always did." James gave a small nod, his tone steady but guarded. "I appreciate that." Harold sighed. "Some of the neighbors are angry not at you, but at what you represent. You are forcing them to see the cracks." James looked at him squarely. "Then maybe it is time they stop pretending the street is smooth." Harold nodded, shame flickering behind his eyes. "You are right. I spent years thinking silence was decency. It was just comfort." He paused, then added, "I am organizing something. A community meeting. This time not at the council. In the open. I think people need to talk to each other without cameras. James tilted his head slightly. You want me to come? No, Harold said, surprising him. I want you to lead it. The weight of that request hung in the air. James exhaled slowly. You sure they are ready to hear me? Harold smiled faintly. Maybe not, but they need to. The following week, the Carter backyard became more than a home. It became a forum. Folding chairs lined the grass, candles flickered on tables, and a handmade banner hung from the fence that read, Neighbors for Change. Faces appeared from all directions, some curious, some cautious. Even the mail carrier stopped to listen. James stood at the front, the same spot where the police had once questioned him. He looked out over the crowd and began. The night you called the police on me, you saw a problem where there was none. Tonight, I am asking you to see the problem that has always been here, and to face it together. The silence that followed was not awkward. It was awakening. The night of the community gathering began with a cautious hush. Porch lights glowed along Willow Creek like silent witnesses, and the air carried that faint electric stillness that comes before truth finally breaks open. James Carter stood in the center of his yard, his voice steady, his hands clasped behind his back as neighbors took their seats. This is not about blame, he said. It is about responsibility. His tone was calm, but it carried the kind of weight that only comes from living the lesson you are teaching. Across the circle, faces reflected every kind of emotion, some open, some tense, some already defensive. Lacey Dorn sat next to Harold, her eyes red but focused. She had spent weeks replaying that night, haunted by the echo of her own voice on the phone with the police. Tonight, she looked like someone ready to own it. James took a breath. When you called the police, Mrs. Dorn, you did what too many people are taught to do, turn fear into authority. You thought safety meant control. But safety without respect is just domination with prettier words. Lacey nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. You are right, she whispered. I thought I was keeping order, but I was just keeping walls. A murmur ran through the group, some nodding, others folding their arms as if holding on to old excuses. James looked around the circle. We cannot fix what we will not name. Racism does not need to wear a hood anymore. It just hides behind words like neighborhood standards or community image. A few heads lowered. Rosa, standing near the fence, spoke up. I have lived here for 3 years. The first time I walked my dog, someone called the homeowners association because they did not recognize me. That was not safety either. Harold cleared his throat, his voice heavy with remorse. We built this community to look perfect, but we forgot to make it fair. A quiet amen came from somewhere in the back, the kind that carries both pain and relief. Alana stepped forward, her voice soft but firm. This is not just about one night or one call. It is about what happens when silence becomes a habit, when we excuse bias because it is polite. The candles flickered as the wind picked up. It almost felt like the air itself was agreeing. James continued, When I came back from war, I promised myself I would never lose faith in the country I fought for. But faith is not blind, it is built. And every time one of you chooses fairness over comfort, you build it with me. He paused, letting that line hang in the night air. You do not need to be black to understand injustice. You just need to be brave enough to see it. The silence that followed was not the old silence, the kind that hides guilt. It was the kind that grows before something changes. From the edge of the crowd, a teenage boy raised his hand. Mr. Carter, he said nervously, my mom told me to stay away from your house after that night. I told her I wanted to come here anyway. The crowd turned toward him. His voice trembled, but his courage filled the space. James smiled faintly. You did the right thing, son. Change starts when you stop inheriting someone else's fear. The audience exhaled as if releasing years of tension. The night no longer felt like confrontation, it felt like healing. And for the first time, Willow Creek was not just a neighborhood. It was a mirror finally being cleaned. As the meeting continued, what began as an uncomfortable gathering slowly transformed into something rare and real. Neighbors who had barely spoken before were now sharing stories, fears, and regrets that had been buried under manicured lawns and polite distance. A woman named Karen Holloway, who lived 3 houses down, raised her hand. I did not call the police, she said, but I thought about it that night. I heard the music, saw the guests, and I assumed it would get out of hand. I told myself it was not about race, but maybe it was. Maybe I just did not want to admit it. The honesty in her voice cracked something open. James nodded slowly. That kind of truth is how it starts, he said. We cannot heal what we keep pretending is invisible. A man in a blue polo, a local realtor, spoke next. I have worked in this area for 20 years, he said. I will be honest, I used to tell my clients that Willow Creek was a safe neighborhood. But what I really meant was white. He paused, his face pale. I am ashamed of that now. The air grew heavy, but not hostile. People were finally seeing their reflections in what they had built. Alana glanced at James, her eyes soft with pride and sorrow all at once. Do you see this? She whispered. They are changing. James shook his head gently. They are beginning, he said. From the back, a voice called out a young black woman named Tasha who had moved into the neighborhood just 2 months earlier. I came here hoping for peace, she said. But the day I moved in, someone left a note on my door that said, wrong address. I almost packed up that night. But then I saw you two at the grocery store, and you smiled like I belonged here. That was the first time I felt safe. Alana stood still, tears welling in her eyes. No one should need permission to feel safe, she said. Not here, not anywhere. Harold Dorn rose to his feet. His voice was low but steady. My wife and I have spent every night talking about what happened. We cannot erase it, but we can face it. I am donating to a local program that helps veterans of color with housing and reintegration. It is the least I can do after realizing how blind I was to what my own neighbors went through. The crowd murmured approval. Some clapped softly, others nodded. James looked at him and said, That is not charity, Harold. That is accountability, and it is what real change looks like. Lacey, sitting beside him, added quietly, I want to volunteer too. I think people like me need to be part of fixing what we broke. James nodded once. Then start with a promise never call the police on peace again. She smiled faintly, wiping her tears. I promise. The mood in the yard shifted from tension to something fragile but bright. A collective exhale after years of polite silence. The candles flickered in the wind, their light bouncing off the faces of people who, for the first time, looked at one another, not as strangers who happened to live on the same street, but as neighbors who finally understood what that word should mean. When the meeting ended, no one rushed to leave. They lingered, talking quietly under the soft hum of porch lights, unwilling to let the night end too soon. And as James gathered the empty chairs, he glanced up at the sky. The same stars he had stared at overseas now hung above Willow Creek, still and watching. As if to say that sometimes victory does not happen on a battlefield, it happens on a front lawn. In the weeks that followed, Willow Creek did not return to what it once was, and that was the point. The neighborhood, once defined by its silence, began to sound different. Porch conversations lingered longer, greetings turned into real exchanges, and every so often, someone would mention the night of the wedding as if it had become a new kind of origin story. James Carter noticed it most in the small things. Kids who used to avoid his yard now rode their bikes past it freely. The same officer who had responded to the noise complaint stopped by one afternoon, still in uniform, just to shake his hand. Sir, he said awkwardly, I have been thinking a lot about that night. I could have done more. I could have said more. James nodded. You are saying it now, he replied, offering his hand. That gesture traveled far beyond that handshake. A local journalist published an article titled, The Wedding That Woke a Neighborhood, and within days, messages began arriving from across the state, families, veterans, teachers, people who had faced the same subtle kind of prejudice and never had the words to name it. Alana printed every letter and placed them in a box labeled, Proof of Change. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the golden light pooled across the living room, she handed that box to James. You started something, she said. He smiled faintly, shaking his head. No. We all did. Across town, a community center had reached out, asking him to help create a workshop on racial bias and civic unity. He agreed on one condition, that it would include both veterans and civilians. Because war teaches you what division costs, he said. On the day of the first session, Harold and Lacey Dorn were among the first to arrive. Lacey looked nervous, clutching a notepad. Harold placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We are here because of you, she told James. No, he said softly. You are here because you are ready. Later that night, as he drove home, he passed the spot where the police car had parked that wedding evening. The memory was still vivid, the flashing lights, the looks, the sting of humiliation, but now it felt different. It was no longer pain. It was proof. Proof that change can start with confrontation, as long as courage follows it. Back at home, Alana was sitting on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, She looked up at him and smiled. "You realize," she said, "we have become the story people tell when they want to believe in better." James sat beside her, gazing at the quiet street. "I do not want to be a story," he said. "I just want it to mean something." Alana leaned her head against his shoulder. "It already does." A breeze rustled the trees, carrying the faint sound of laughter from a few houses down, children playing, parents talking, the ordinary rhythm of peace. For the first time since the wedding, the night felt truly calm. No tension hiding under the quiet, no eyes watching for mistakes, no fear masquerading as order. Just the sound of life happening as it should. James took a long breath and looked toward the horizon. "You know," he said, his voice low, "I used to think heroism was about what you did in battle. But maybe it is about what you do after the courage to stay, to forgive, to build." Alana reached for his hand. "Then you are still a hero," she whispered. He shook his head gently. "No," he said, "we are." The porch light above them glowed warm against the night, and for once, it did not feel like a warning. It felt like home. Months passed, and what began as a neighborhood conversation had grown into a movement larger than anyone in Willow Creek could have imagined. The local newspaper's article had caught national attention. Soon after, a regional news outlet ran a story titled, "From Noise Complaint to Neighborhood Reform," featuring James and Alana Carter on the cover. Invitations poured in, television interviews, leadership summits, nonprofit partnerships, but James continued to choose carefully where he spoke. "I am not interested in fame," he told Alana one morning as they prepared breakfast. "I am interested in change that lasts longer than a headline." Alana smiled, sliding a cup of coffee toward him. "Then speak where it matters most." That chance came when the governor's office called, requesting that James attend a policy roundtable on community relations and policing reform. "We could use your perspective," the aide said. James hesitated for a moment, then agreed. "If we are going to talk about reform," he said, "let us start with respect." The roundtable took place in the state capitol, under lights that seemed too bright and chairs that felt too formal. Around the table sat city officials, law enforcement leaders, and activists, each with their own agenda. When it was James's turn to speak, he did not bring notes. He did not need them. "The night I was reported for my own wedding," he began, "was not about one neighbor or one phone call. It was about the quiet conditioning that teaches people to fear what does not look familiar. You can pass all the laws you want, but until you teach empathy, nothing will stick." The room went silent. "Training cannot just be about what to do during a crisis," he continued. "It has to be about how not to create one." A sheriff from a nearby county leaned forward. "Mr. Carter, what do you suggest we do differently?" James looked at him directly. "Listen, not with your rank, with your humanity. Every policy we write should start with the question, who will this protect, and who will it punish?" The governor nodded thoughtfully. "That is a fair question, Mr. Carter," she said. "Maybe one we should have asked a long time ago." By the end of the session, a new initiative had been proposed, one that required officers and community members to attend joint forums quarterly, hosted in neutral spaces like schools and community centers. The press would later call it the Carter Protocol. James never asked for that name, but it stuck. That evening, as he drove home, he passed through neighborhoods that looked just like Willow Creek, quiet, orderly, unaware that they were part of something changing beneath the surface. When he pulled into his driveway, the porch light glowed as always, steady and warm. Alana met him at the door, her eyes tired but bright. "You did good today," she said. "So did you," he replied. "You believed in something that no one could see yet." She laughed softly. "That is marriage too." They stood there for a while, the sound of crickets filling the silence between them. James finally said, "You know, the funny thing is, that night was supposed to be about love, and maybe it still was. Because real love, whether for a person or a country, means holding it accountable when it forgets what it stands for." Alana nodded, her voice quiet but certain, "and reminding it until it remembers." In that moment, surrounded by the hum of a neighborhood finally awake, James Carter understood something simple and profound. Change did not always march in parades or speak from podiums. Sometimes, it stood quietly on a porch, under a warm light, in a place that finally felt like home. Winter settled softly over Willow Creek, coating rooftops with pale frost and trimming the trees with silver light. Life had found its rhythm again, quieter but stronger, like a song rewritten in a better key. James Carter spent most mornings in his study, the same room where he had once stared at old medals and ghosts from his service days. Now, the desk was cluttered not with military reports, but with letters, thank you notes, invitations, and testimonies from strangers who said his story had changed how they saw their neighbors. Some letters came from veterans, others from high school students. One was from a police officer in Detroit who wrote, "You reminded me what I swore to protect the people, not the comfort." James kept that one pinned above his desk. Alana walked in with 2 mugs of hot coffee, her hair tied loosely, her tone light. "You are working too hard again," she teased. "You are supposed to be retired." He smiled faintly. "I thought retirement meant peace, not silence. And yet, here you are, trying to fix the whole country from this little room. Maybe just a few minds at a time," he said. That afternoon, the doorbell rang. Outside stood Tasha, the young woman who had spoken at the neighborhood meeting months ago. She looked both nervous and determined. "Mr. Carter," she said, "I just got into law school. I wanted to thank you." He blinked, surprised. "You did that yourself, Tasha." She shook her head. "No, you made me stay when I wanted to run. I want to study civil rights law. I want to make sure no one gets treated like you did." James felt something shift inside him, a mix of pride and humility that words could not hold. "Then promise me this," he said. "Do not fight with anger, fight with precision." She nodded, smiling. "I will." When she left, Alana turned to him. "You see what you are doing?" "I am just talking to people," he said quietly. "That is all it takes sometimes." Later that evening, as snow began to fall, Harold and Lacey Dorn stopped by for dinner. It had become a tradition now, Sunday nights shared over food and long, honest conversation. Lacey helped set the table, her laughter lighter than it had been in months. Harold carried a bottle of wine in a worn envelope. "This came for you at the community center," he said, handing it over. Inside was a certificate signed by the governor and a folded letter. It read, "For demonstrating the highest example of civic courage and leadership in the face of discrimination, we honor James Carter, veteran and citizen." James read it silently, then placed it on the table. "I do not need a certificate to prove I did what was right," he said. Lacey smiled softly. "Maybe it is not about proof. Maybe it is about reminder so that people who come after you know how one act of decency can ripple out." James looked around the table, at the faces that had once been divided by fear and now joined by trust. "Then let it remind all of us," he said. They ate together while snow drifted gently outside, muffling the world beyond the glass. For the first time, Willow Creek did not feel like a neighborhood guarded by gates or suspicion. It felt like a community bound by conscience. And as James watched the snow settle quietly on the street he had once been told he did not belong to, he realized something deeper than victory. This was not just peace earned, it was peace shared. Spring returned to Willow Creek with a gentleness that felt earned. The lawns that had once been battlegrounds of unspoken bias now bloomed with the same color no one could argue with: green. Children played freely again, riding bikes across yards that no longer drew invisible lines. The street felt different now, lighter, open, awake. James Carter stood on his porch one Saturday morning, coffee in hand, watching as volunteers from the neighborhood gathered to plant trees near the entrance sign. It was part of a new project called Roots of Change, started by Tasha and backed by the local council. Alana came outside, wearing her garden gloves, and nudged him with her shoulder. "You could at least pretend you are not getting sentimental," she teased. He smiled, eyes still on the crowd. "I am just watching what hope looks like when it finally learns to breathe." She laughed softly. "You sound like one of those motivational speakers." "Then maybe I finally earned the right to sound corny," he said, chuckling. Across the street, Lacey Dorn waved from her yard. She was hosting an open barbecue that afternoon for everyone on the block, something unthinkable a year earlier. Harold was already setting up tables, his dog wagging its tail as children ran by. "It is strange," Alana said, adjusting her gloves, "how one act of ugliness made all of this possible." James nodded slowly. "Sometimes the truth does not break things. It fixes what was already cracked." As they walked over to join the volunteers, a local news van parked at the corner. The reporter, the same one who had covered the original incident, stepped out with a camera crew. "Mr. Carter," she called, "we heard the neighborhood is celebrating the anniversary of that night. May we ask what it feels like now?" James paused, glancing at Alana, then turned back to the camera. "It feels like redemption," he said. "Not the kind you get from an apology, but the kind you build from change." The reporter smiled. "Some people are calling you a hero." James shook his head. "No, heroes save lives. I just reminded people to see them. The footage later aired that evening across local networks, showing the image of a neighborhood once divided now gathered under string lights and laughter. As twilight settled, James took a seat near the edge of the crowd, watching everyone talk, eat, and live freely without looking over their shoulders. Rosa raised her glass for a toast. "To peace hard-earned," she said, "and to neighbors who finally act like neighbors." Glasses clinked. Applause rippled through the group. Alana leaned over to James. "Would you have imagined this a year ago?" He smiled softly. "Not in 1,000 years, but maybe it was supposed to happen this way." A cool breeze swept through, carrying the faint scent of grilled food and the laughter of children. For a brief moment, James closed his eyes, feeling the stillness that had once been impossible here. He thought of his platoon, of Lieutenant Harris, of the promise he had made years ago to come home to a country worth fighting for. And for the first time, he believed he had. When he opened his eyes again, the stars were coming out above Willow Creek, steady and bright. He turned to Alana and said, "This is what victory looks like. Not loud, not flashy, just fair." She nodded, her hand finding his. "And you gave it to them." He shook his head gently. "No," he said. "We gave it to each other." The camera caught that moment, the quiet smile between them, the reflection of porch lights in their eyes. And long after the crowd had gone home, that image remained the proof that even in a world still learning how to be just, one act of grace could rewrite everything.